Now approaching the beginning of our 26th year, more than a quarter of a century of service to the worldwide amateur radio community, we are this week in amateur radio. Your all-amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service of the air. This is edition number 1349 with a release and air date of Saturday, January 4, 2025. Please take the program to your air following the cue tone.
On the air and streaming across the internet since 1993, serving the amateur radio community with weekly amateur radio news and special features, we are This Week in Amateur Radio, the worldwide premier amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service of the air. Here are the stories for release around the earth as we come to air with edition number 1349. Winter Field Day 2025 is coming up. Are you ready? The US considers a ban on home internet equipment made by TP-Link. NASA's Deep Space Network is upgraded with the installation of a new antenna. The RTTY Roundup is being held as we come to air this week. The CQDX Marathon begins yet another year-long contest. January arrives and brings Straight Key Month with it. We will tell you all about it. The CW Ops announce its 2024 Advancing the Art of CW Award. Registration is now open for the 2025 Dayton Contest University. The Handy Ham program ends 2024 with gains and successes. We will have the details. The FCC fines Paramount Global a substantial amount for emergency notification violations. It looks like the pair of astronauts stranded aboard the space station have to wait a little longer for a ride home. The League announces the 2025 Foundation scholarships. Recent solar storms are a major concern for the ever-growing satellite constellations in orbit. And NASA's Parker Solar Probe finally touches the Sun. We will have all the details in this week's report. These headline stories will come to you in a moment, along with this week's special features. We'll visit with Bruce Page, KK5DO, and get an update from AMSAT and what's new with all those amateur satellites in orbit. Australia's own Onno Benschop, VK6FLAB, and Foundations of Amateur Radio will be covering Week 5 of his open-source build called The Bald Yak. This week's topic is the debugging. Our own amateur radio historian, Will Rogers, K5WLR, will be here with another edition of A Century of Amateur Radio. This week will takes us aboard the Wayback Machine to when the World War I armistice was signed and amateurs were finally getting back on the air, except that getting back on the air meant everyone had to be re-licensed. We will stop by and visit with Bill Saliers, AJ8B in the DX Corner, with all the latest news on DXpeditions, DX, upcoming radio sport contests, and more. That's all straight ahead as North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service, This Week in Amateur Radio, takes to the air. Right now. Reporting from our chilly headquarters studio just outside Albany, New York, this is W2XBS.
And reporting from the News Bureau in Cortlandville, New York, I'm KB2FAF. The name is Chris, and Happy New Year to you.
And reporting from our News Bureau just outside Albany, New York, where we have miraculously missed all the snow that's falling across New York State, I'm Rich Lawrence, KB2MOB.
And reporting from our News Bureau in Rochester, New York, along the southern shore of Lake Ontario, I'm Dave Wilson, WA2HOY, wishing everyone a Happy New Year and all the best in 2025.
And reporting from our News Bureau in Knoxville, Tennessee, where we're wishing you all the best in 2025 and good DX, I'm Josh Marler, AA4WX.
And reporting from our Troy, New York News Bureau where the salt trucks are out in force, I'm Eric, KD2RJX.
And reporting from our Catskill Mountains radio outpost in upstate New York, where the holiday is over, all the roast beef has been eaten, and the pie is all gone, and we're back to our normal midwinter time routine here. I'm Don Hulick, K2ATJ.
And reporting from our News Bureau in Fayetteville, Arkansas, where we are heading into colder weather along with single-digit wind chill readings and possible winter precipitation, I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR. Brrr.
I'm Chris Perrine, KB2FAF, and leading off our news this week, Winter Field Day hosted by the Winter Field Day Association, is scheduled to run from 1900 UTC on Saturday, January 25th, through 1859 UTC on Sunday, January 26th. John Ross, KD8 IDJ, is here with the details.
WFD is held on the last full weekend in January and is a communications exercise. It can be worked from the comfort of your home or from a remote location. You can participate by yourself, with your friends and family, or with a local club. WFD is designed to help increase your level of preparedness for disasters and for you to improve and practice your operating skills in winter environments, as the potential for freezing temperatures, snow, ice, and other hazards present unique operating conditions. WFD is open to participants worldwide. As a matter of fact, amateur radio operators may use frequencies on the HF, VHF, or UHF bands and are free to use any mode that can faithfully transmit the required exchange intact. Similar to ARRL's Field Day, bonus points are earned in several ways, including from using non-commercial power sources, operating from remote locations, and making satellite contacts, and more. Make sure you register your location at the WFD registration page, and to date there are 345 locations registered around the world. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
If you participate in Winter Field Day, remember to mark your calendar for the 2025 ARRL Field Day on June 28th and 29th. For additional information, visit the Field Day page on the League website.
Authorities in the United States are considering a ban on China's TP-Link technology company over potential national security concerns after its home internet routers were linked to cyber attacks, says IT News, quoting a Wall Street Journal report. The U.S. Commerce, Defense, and Justice Departments have opened separate probes into the company, with authorities targeting a ban on the sale of TP-Link routers in the U.S. as early as this year. An office of the Commerce Department has even subpoenaed the company, while the Defense Department launched its investigation into Chinese manufactured routers earlier this year, the newspaper reported, citing people familiar with the matter. Last year, the U.S. Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Agency said TP-Link routers had a vulnerability that could be exploited to execute remote code. Shares of Netgear, a San Jose-based home networking company and a TP-Link rival, jumped more than 12% following the report.
Installation of the latest antenna took place on December 18th, when teams at NASA's Goldstone Deep Space Communications Complex near Barstow, California, installed the 133-ton reflector framework for Deep Space Station 23, a multi-frequency beam waveguide antenna. When operational in 2026, Deep Space Station 23 will receive transmissions from missions such as Perseverance, Psyche, Europa, Clipper, Voyager 1, and a growing fleet of future human and robotic spacecraft in deep space. Construction of the new antenna has been underway for more than 4 years, and during the installation, teams used a crawler crane to lower the metal skeleton of the 34-meter-wide parabolic reflector before it was bolted to a 20-meter-high alidade, a platform above the antenna's pedestal that will steer the reflector during operations. One of the biggest challenges facing us during the lift was to ensure that 40 bolt holes were perfectly aligned between the structure and the alidade, said Jermaine Aziz, Systems Engineer, Deep Space Network Aperture Enhancement Program of NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Southern California. This required a meticulous emphasis on alignment prior to the lift to guarantee everything went smoothly on the day. This addition to the Deep Space Network represents a crucial communication upgrade for the agency, said Kevin Coggins, Deputy Associate Administrator of NASA's Space Communications and Navigation Program. The communications infrastructure has been in continuous operations since its creation in 1963, and with this upgrade, we are ensuring NASA is ready to support the growing number of missions exploring the Moon, Mars, and beyond. With the Deep Space Network, we are able to explore the Martian landscape with our rovers, see the James Webb Space Telescope's stunning cosmic observations, and so much more, said Lori Leshin, director of JPL. The network enables over 40 deep space missions, including the farthest human-made objects in the universe, Voyager 1 and 2. With upgrades like these, the network will continue to support humanity's exploration of our solar system and beyond, enabling groundbreaking science and discovery far into the future. NASA's Deep Space Network is managed by the Jet Propulsion Laboratory.
Coming up on our 26th year keeping the amateur radio community around the world informed, you are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio. Available worldwide as a podcast from our web at twiar.net.
The International Amateur Radio Union Monitoring System has released a log with accompanying video of hundreds of examples of non-amateur transmissions taking place across the amateur radio high-frequency bands during 2024. Examples include DRM broadcast from Communications University of China, Super DARN radars from across the globe, CODAR, British, over-the-horizon radars, as well as CBeers and pirate radio operators. All these hundreds of non-amateur transmissions, the majority of them long-lasting, are a big annoyance for the amateur radio operators that try to enjoy our hobby in the bands that are allotted for that purpose, as they drastically reduce the usable spectrum in these bands.
The first ARRL contest of 2025 is about to begin. The RRL Rate RTTY roundup is this weekend. John Ross, KD8I-DJ, is there with the details.
The ARRL RTTY RTTY Roundup is this weekend. The first ARRL contest of 2025 is about to begin as the peak of Solar Cycle 25 continues to deliver exceptional propagation. The event begins at 1800 UTC on Saturday, January 4th, and concludes at 2359 UTC on Sunday, January 5th. Operation is allowed using RTTY mode on the 80, 40, 20, 15, and 10-meter bands. RTTY Roundup is a great opportunity to explore this unique digital mode, said ARRL Contest Program Manager Paul Bork, N1SFE, and it's not hard to get started in the mode. If you're set up to run digital modes, you're halfway there, said Bork. For more information on getting started with RTTY, a great resource to check out is rttycontesting.com. RTTY traces its origins back to the beginning of landline teleprinter operations in 1849, but RTTY contesting has seen a resurgence in popularity in recent years. In fact, in the 2024 RTTY Roundup, there were 1,953 logs submitted, 160 more than 2023. I'm John Ross, KD8I-DJ.
Find more information about the contest, awards, and rules at www.arrl.org/RTTY-Roundup. Log submissions are due within 7 days of the contest.
A scholar from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology has expressed concern about the impact of geomagnetic storms on space traffic coordination among satellites. 2 geomagnetic storms this year had a serious impact on low Earth orbit satellites after increased atmospheric density created drag affecting satellites' orbit. The first storm was a solar event last May that made the aurora more visible at low latitudes in the northern hemisphere. The second storm was in October. Most of the satellites affected by these storms were part of Starlink's constellation. William Parker of MIT told a meeting of the American Geophysical Union on December 9th that the shift in orbits was not easy to accurately track, posing a greater likelihood of collisions. He called the phenomenon a mass migration of satellites. He called for better forecasting of space weather and the use of better models, saying such requirements were critical to being able to move forward with these kinds of operations in space.
The CQDX Marathon is back, and just as the marathon for 2024 comes to an end, the new one has begun. Avid DXers are already on the hunt through the end of December, hoping to work as many countries and CQ zones as possible. The idea, of course, is to see who can work the most countries or DX entities and CQ zones by the time 2359 rolls around on December 31st, 2025. Keep in mind that contacts through repeaters and satellites do not count, nor do contacts with aeronautical, mobile, or maritime stations. Only the use of amateur radio frequencies is permitted. Organizers made some changes in mid-December to rules that affect the awards, operating class, and youth participation. For a full description of the rules and who is affected, visit dxmarathon.com/rules/2025 on the web. That's dxmarathon.com/rules/2025 on the web.
According to the Lake Placid News, 30 is the magic number for members of Search and Rescue of the Adirondacks, an organization in the northern mountains of New York State. Known by the acronym SARNAC, the group is marking its 30th year with a core of 30 volunteers. It's also preparing for the arrival of 30 new radios, the result of a grant of more than $6,000 from the town of North Elba. This will enable SARNAC to continue its mission to support search and recovery missions by replacing its second-hand fire department radio with updated communications equipment. The new radios will have longer-lasting batteries and a greater range than the 40-kilometer radius surrounding the local repeater. They will also have digital capability. Coordinator Jeff Berry, KE2DKA, told the Lake Placid News that SARNAC has been experiencing a resurgence since the challenges of the pandemic eased up and is inspired to expand its community engagement. He said volunteers have already begun doing more local public service activities, providing support to major races and other events, including the 90-mile Adirondack Canoe Classic. SARNAC has had support, too, from the local ham radio clubs, including the Adirondack Amateur Radio Association and the High Peaks Amateur Radio Group. Although SARNAC members such as Elena Lumby, KE2DJC, and Joe Shoemaker, K2SHU, already have their ham licenses, the group plans to use the grant money to help fund training so that more research and rescue team volunteers can become hams too. That will hopefully carry them and SARNAC's important work for at least another 30 years.
January is the month to put your paddle in the drawer and dust off your straight key. If you have cooties or bugs in your ham shack, you can use them too. It's time for the 19th annual Straight Key Month hosted by the Straight Key Century Club. Throughout the month, you will be able to work Kilo 3 Yankee stations in the United States call areas, including Hawaii, Alaska, and Puerto Rico. In addition, stations from regions within the International Amateur Radio Union membership in Africa, Asia, Europe, North America, Oceania, and South America will also be on the air. Taking their cue from the ARRL's long-running Straight Key Night every January 1st, the Straight Key Century Club extends the event from the 2nd to the 31st of the month. Whether you're a seasoned operator or just beginning your CW journey, you'll find the Straight Key Month to be a great deal of fun while increasing your skills. Information about this event can be found at skccgroup.com/Kilo 3 Yankee.
Each year, CW Ops, an international organization that promotes and advances Morse code, or CW, in amateur radio communications, accepts nominations for individuals, groups, and organizations for the CW Ops Award for advancing the art of CW. The award recognizes contributions made toward advancing the art or practice of radio communications by Morse code. The Radio Officers Association, or ROA, is the recipient of the 2024 CW Ops Award for advancing the art of CW. ROA honors and preserves the history and accomplishments of radio professionals from across the merchant navy, coast station service, and civil aeronautical industry. Its membership includes nearly 400 former professional radio officers, half of whom hold amateur radio licenses. CW Ops recognized ROA's efforts to preserve CW history through its journal and for the activities that span CW monitoring, on-air nets, and CW-related museum displays and related activities. The award was recently accepted by ROA's Bill Cross, G0ELZ, at the organization's annual meeting in Liverpool, England. It was presented by CW Ops President Stu Rolfe, GW0ETF.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available to download as a podcast from anywhere on the web podcasts are available.
The ARRL Foundation Scholarship Program continues to accept applications for the 2025 scholarship cycle. The application period is open until 12 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time on January 6th. The scholarships are available to eligible amateur radio operators pursuing higher education. There are more than 100 scholarships, ranging from $500 to $25,000. The scholarships have been established by generous donors and can help fund a portion of the ham's education. Descriptions of the scholarships may be found on the League's website. In 2024, 135 scholarships totaling more than $700,000 were awarded. Young hams throughout the country benefited from scholarships ranging from $500 to $25,000 to assist them with college or university expenses. Funded entirely through the generous contributions of individuals, clubs, and friends, the scholarship program is one of two areas of focus, the other being grants. ARRL Director of Development Kevin Beal, K8EAL, is encouraged by the program. Quote, hams are always learning. Being able to honor that dedication to education through generously funded scholarship programs helps relieve some of the financial burden that students can experience, he said. ARRL's mission to promote and protect the art, the science, and the enjoyment of amateur radio, and to develop the next generation of radio amateurs, through programs like the Free Youth Membership and the ARRL Teachers Institute on Wireless Technology. ARRL is enabling the futures in STEM field careers throughout amateur radio.
Registration is now open for the 2025 Dayton Contest University, or CTU, to be held all day on Thursday, May 15, 2025, at the Hope Hotel on Wright-Patterson Air Force Base the day before Hamvention opens in Xenia, Ohio. 2025 will be the 16th year for Contest University at Dayton. 8 different countries have hosted CTUs, including the USA, Australia, Russia, Germany, Italy, England, Brazil, and Finland. Over 10,000 students have attended these CTUs, with more than 100 CTU professors sharing their contesting experiences. The 2025 CTU Dayton course outline will be posted once all have been confirmed. Each presentation is carefully prepared with up-to-date information. CTU professors are experienced contesters who will share their knowledge, and participants can ask questions and learn new ways to enjoy contesting. Videos and PDF presentations from past CTUs can be viewed at contestuniversity.com. There are scholarships available for CTU through a grant from the Northern California DX Foundation for students aged 25 or younger. Student registration information is on the CTU website, contestuniversity.com.
The University of Southern California Rocket Propulsion Lab has shattered the international altitude record for amateur rocketry with their Aftershock 2 rocket, reaching an unprecedented 470,000 feet. This achievement surpasses the previous 20-year record of 380,000 feet and establishes Aftershock 2 as the first civilian-built rocket to achieve this altitude. Equipped with the most powerful solid propellant motor ever fired by students and enhanced thermal protection system, the rocket endured hypersonic speeds with innovative features like titanium-coated fins and a custom paint system. On the professional side of rocketry, the first Block 2 version of the giant SpaceX Starship, Ship 33, recently rolled out for testing and completed its first static fire test. It will be stacked on Booster 14 before it is targeted to complete the first flight of the Block 2 reusable upper stage in January this year. This upgraded ship adds catch hardware and an additional ring, making it 1.8 meters taller and now totaling 408 feet when eventually stacked on top of Booster 14. This added height will allow it to pack 300 tons more propellant.
It's time for this week's edition of AMSAT Satellite Shorts from all over, and we begin this week with a call for help from Ted Schussler, N5HYP, who's looking for volunteers for the upcoming Fort Worth Cowtown Hamfest in Fort Worth, Texas. The dates have slipped me, he says, but the Hamfest is only 3 weekends away, January 17 and 18. I have booked table space and at least one presentation for the weekend. Therefore, I'm looking for additional volunteers to help man the table, do demos, and just talk about amateur radio and space. The Cowtown Club was the home of the late Keith Pugh, W5IU, who was an AMSAT ambassador and ARIS mentor for many years before his passing. The Cowtown Club recently dedicated a satellite status of their clubhouse in his honor and with some of his donated hardware. All this to say that the Cowtown Hamfest is a friend of AMSAT, and so it's always good for us to make a good showing. You can contact Tom Schuschler via schuschler@amsat.org or n5hyp@arrl.net for more information or to volunteer. And our final short for this week is the announcement of the 39th Annual Small Satellite Conference. It's scheduled for August 11th through the 13th of 2025. The event will be held at the Salt Palace Convention Center in Salt Lake City, Utah. Persons wanting to submit an abstract for a talk, a poster, or a flash talk must submit their abstract by February 4th to be considered. Educators and researchers at universities can also apply for a university exhibit. Complete information is available at https://smallsat.org.
The Federal Communications Commission Enforcement Bureau said Paramount Global is being fined $244,952 for violations of emergency alerting rules, and the company has entered into a consent decree detailing how it will work to avoid future violations. The fine and decree follow an FCC investigation into allegations that various operations owned by Paramount improperly transmitted emergency alert system codes, the EAS attention signal or recordings, or simulations during 2 TV programs and 1 radio program. In the consent decree, Paramount admitted violations involving the syndicated Entertainment Tonight broadcast on October 25, 2023, and the CBS News Radio On the Hour newscast on June 6, 2024. It also admitted certain facts regarding an episode of Young Sheldon broadcast by the CBS television network on May 18, 2023. The FCC has rules against broadcasting emergency alert tones outside of emergency alerts because their regular use in programming might desensitize viewers and listeners, causing them to ignore actual emergency alerts. The FCC issued several significant fines regarding a variety of EAS rules in 2024 against such companies as ESPN and Charter Communications. The investigation into CBS News Radio began after Paramount emailed the FCC on June 7th, indicating that a news story concerning an event at Universal Studios may have improperly transmitted or caused to be transmitted an EAS tone or simulation thereof, the FCC said. The company said a top-of-the-hour newscast airing on 400 CBS News Radio affiliates at 4 p.m. Eastern on June 6th contained about 3 seconds of the EAS attention signal. Most affiliates carried the newscast, the FCC said. The investigation into the daily syndicated entertainment news magazine ET was also prompted by an email from Paramount. A brief excerpt of the broadcast EAS tones, lasting approximately 1 second, appears to have been aired during the October 24, 2023 episode of the program Entertainment Tonight, the company reported. The FCC also said it became aware of the May 18, 2023 episode of the sitcom Young Sheldon airing on the CBS television network might have included an improper use of EAS tones, prompting an investigation. The EAS tones occurred during a scene in an episode titled A Tornado, A 10-Hour Flight, and A Darn Fine Ring, in which some of the show's characters are driving in a car in severe weather and become aware of an impending tornado, the FCC said.
Transmissions from amateur radio enthusiasts may hold the key to locating the wreckage of the Malaysia Airlines jet that vanished a decade ago in one of the greatest aviation mysteries on record. The Malaysian government has just announced that it has agreed to resume the search for the remains of MH370, the Boeing 777 that disappeared in March 2014 while carrying 239 people. Efforts will focus on a new area of seabed covering around 5,800 square miles, slightly bigger than Northern Ireland, according to Anthony Loke, the Malaysian transport minister. The search will be led by underwater exploration firm Ocean Infinity, which conducted the last sweep in 2018. This time around, the investigation is expected to draw on a new area of research involving whisper transmissions from amateur radio operators.
You're listening to North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine of the air. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, distributed worldwide at twiar.net.
NASA announced on Tuesday the latest delay in the homecoming for Butch Wilmore and Suni Williams, KD-5 PLB. Their space mission was extended again. That means they won't be back on Earth until spring, 10 months after rocketing into orbit on Boeing's Starliner capsule. The two test pilots planned on being away just a week or so when they blasted off June 5th on Boeing's first astronaut flight to the International Space Station. Their mission grew from 8 days to 8 months after NASA decided to send the company's problem-plagued Starliner capsule back empty in September. Now the pair won't return until the end of March or even April because of a delay in launching their replacements, according to NASA. NASA's next crew of 4 was supposed to launch in February, followed by Wilmore's and Williams' return home by the end of that month alongside 2 other astronauts. But SpaceX needs more time to prepare the brand-new capsule for liftoff. That launch is now scheduled for no earlier than late March. Recently, news articles suggesting that Ms. Williams was experiencing health problems because of her unplanned extended stay in orbit set off widespread rumors on social media. NASA's medical chief, Dr. James Polk, assured the public on November 14th that Williams is healthy and not suffering from any medical problems. "I think there's some rumors around there that I'm losing weight and stuff," Williams said in an interview on November 12th. "No, I'm actually right at the same amount. Things shift around quite a bit, you know?" Not only is she healthy, according to her and NASA, but they made Williams commander of Expedition 72 crew. As KD-5 PLB, she continues to be an active participant in AIR's contacts during her time aboard the ISS.
Hello and welcome to the DX Corner for your weekly dose of DX. I'm Bill, AJ8B. Happy New Year! I apologize if I don't sound quite like myself. I've been struggling with the same congestion that everyone else seems to be dealing with. It has not hurt my CW, but it definitely has impacted my sideband skills. I hope by next week I will sound like myself again, so bear with me. Speaking of next week, I will have that list of contests that you need to set aside some time for. I've mentioned this a couple times, and what I usually do is start at the beginning of the year and set those weekends aside or those half days aside, and frankly, I put it on my calendar and let my family know about it, and then I don't feel guilty about hiding in the basement. So I'll have that list for you next week. Well, let's get started on our DX News. This section of DX News comes from Bernie, W3UR, editor of the Daily DX, the Weekly DX, and the How's DX column in QST. If you would like a free 2-week trial of the Daily DX, your only source of real-time DX information, just drop me a note at thedxmentor@gmail.com. So Tim Toten, N4GN, will be active as DU0 Alpha, and has at least one very good antenna on all bands, 160 through 6 with full power, end quote, from the Philippines. Tim is not having any problems being heard. However, he does have, quote, some significant noise challenges on the receive side, end quote. This includes local issues like power line noise, noisy motors, welders, cheap LED lights, etc. And also state-funded over-the-horizon radar and jamming systems that sometimes infiltrate the bands. Tim apologizes if it seems he is unable to copy at times. Currently, DU0 Alpha is emphasizing activity on 160, 80, and 6 meters, and, quote, to a lesser extent, 30, 17, and 12 meters. Due to noise issues, he is mainly on FT8 and FT4. However, when the noise situation allows, he can be found on CW and sideband. Tim is also able to operate multiple radios simultaneously, so don't be surprised if you hear him on more than one band at one time. Soon, he will be installing receive antennas and stacks for the upper contest bands and more antennas on 6. He also will work on transmit antennas for the low bands. DU0 Alpha is his main station, which is completely remote capable. Look for him to be active in many popular contests. Tim also plans BQRV from his NP4 TT station. He uploads all QSOs to LOTW and Clublog. Traditional paper confirmations are available via KU9 Charlie. Adrian, G0KOM, is planning to go back to ZC4, the UK sovereign base areas on Cyprus, in March of next year. He plans to operate in the 2025 CQWPX sideband contest. He'll be there and be active as ZC4MK from March 24th to the 31st. He is also looking at going into ZC4 in July of 2025. And I've mentioned this before, ZC4 is not rare, but it is not common. So if you're if you need that as an all-time new one or for the CQ Marathon Contest, I would mark those dates down, March 24 to 31st and sometime in July. Alex, K6 VHF, will be back on Roatan Island, Honduras as K6 VHF stroke HR9 on 80 through 6 meters from January 5th to the 12th. Alex will be running two 100-watt stations using Hex, Delta Loop, Sloper, J-Pole, and Yagi antennas. You can QSL the HR9 operation via K6 VHF, OQRS, and LOTW. W5RCX, Antoinette, and K0YA, Tom, will be staying at the V47JA rental station in St. Kitts from February 5th to March 5th. They will be QRV as V4 stroke home calls, except during the ARL DXCW contest when they will be using V47Y as their call sign. Tony, KD8RTT, will be vacationing from the Turks and Caicos Islands from January 28 to February 2nd. He plans to take a rig and will be QRV as VP5 stroke KD8RTT holiday style on the HF bands and satellites. Anyone interested in updates can send him an email at vp5@kd8rtt.com. We have an update from the Rebel DX group who's currently activating T32 from East Kiribati. We have installed the following antennas: 2 hex beams with a pentaplexer, verticals for 60, 40, 30, 15, and 12, inverted Vs for 80 and 10, and an inverted L for 160. They plan to have 2 FT8 stations on some bands, so stay tuned for them and check out their website. And I've heard T32, TTT all over the place, so good luck working them. IZ2 DPX Giovanni has announced his next DXpedition will be to St. Helena Island as ZD7 DPX. He did not give any dates yet. The holiday-style operation will be on single sideband and FT8 from the ZD7 CTO station. So here's a contest update. Contest University, otherwise known as CTU, it will be held in Dayton 2025 at the Dayton Hamvention, and registration is now open. Quote, I'm proud to announce that registration is now open for the 2025 Dayton Contest University, CTU, to be held all day on Thursday, May 15, 2025, at the Hope Hotel. This is the day before Hamvention opens in Xenia. CTU 2024 Dayton was amazing, and we expect 2025 CTU to be even better. 8 different countries have hosted CTUs over the past 16 years: the USA, Australia, Russia, Germany, Italy, England, Brazil, and Finland. Over 10,000 students have attended these CTUs, with more than 100 CTU professors sharing their contesting experience. 2025 will be the 16th year for the CTU Dayton. To give you an idea of the quality of the CTU content activities, you can see videos and PDF presentations from past CTUs on the CTU website, which is contestuniversity.com. The 2025 CTU Dayton course outline will be posted once all have confirmed for 2025. Check the CTU website regularly for updates. Each presentation is carefully prepared with up-to-date information. The CTU professors are experienced contesters and will share their knowledge. You can ask questions and find out new ways to enjoy contesting. There are scholarships, which is really your registration getting paid, available for CTU through a grant from the Northern California DX Foundation for those 25 years old and younger students. Please use the Contact Us button at the bottom of the CTU website to get more information. Again, the URL is contestuniversity.com. Thanks to all of the CTU sponsors, including ICOM America, DX Engineering, the Northern California DX Foundation, YASME, ARDC, and the Radio Club of America for making CTU possible. It would not happen without the leadership of Terry, Cade, MNJ. Also, thanks to KC3, UCJ, N8AMY, and K1SO for all of their help with CTU. And special thanks go to Scott, K9FOX from QTH.com, for hosting, constructing, and maintaining the CTU headquarters website. We'll see you at Dayton at CTU 2025. And this is from Tim, K3LR, the Contest University chairman. Regrettably, I have yet to attend one of those. But boy, I've been over that website a ton and have learned a bunch of stuff. But I'd really rather be there for the fellowship and the networking, and I'm going to try to make it this year. Until next week, this is Bill, AJ8B saying 7-3, and thanks to my ex-wife Karen for her love and support. I hope to see you in the pile-ups.
Coming up next, This Week in Amateur Radio is presenting another chapter of A Century of Amateur Radio, Hams, Organizations, Events, Inventions, from the mind of Chris Cordella, W2PA, and his editing team. Each episode will bring a different aspect of early amateur radio history. Coming up right after station identification, here on This Week in Amateur Radio.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available to download as a podcast from anywhere on the web podcasts are available.
Welcome to the 22nd segment of Ham Radio History, A Century of Amateur Radio, Hams, Organizations, Events, Inventions. I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR. A great big thank you to Chris Cordella, W2PA, for permitting us to use his website in the setting up of these programs. Now, here's the next chapter of Ham Radio History. Liberty. Finally, nearly 1 year after the armistice, a breakthrough. A single tacked-on page after the end cover of October QST, a hastily added special announcement proclaimed, "Ban off! The job is done, and the ARRL did it. See the next QST for details." The H.R. Hick cover drawing for the November issue depicted a joyous ham bursting from the top of a can, popping off the lid, which, just to make sure the metaphor was understood, is labeled the lid. He clutches a copy of QST in one hand, a certificate in the other. The can's label reads, "Liberty Number," in big letters. The issue opened with Maxim writing on the importance of organization, citing both the establishment of the League and radio clubs as prime examples. Only by having a national organization were hams able to influence the government on the one hand by preventing legislation that threatened amateur radio's existence, and assist it on the other by providing wartime operators on very short notice. It was a noble effort for all concerned, and lifted amateur radio from the realm of toyland to the dignity of a valuable national asset. Aside from self-preservation, another benefit of organization was to enable doing momentous things, such as the transcontinental relay work, impressive to outsiders. Up to the time that we amateurs began relay work, the limit which one could transmit intelligence without paying tribute either to the government or to the Western Union or the Postal Telegraph Company was the distance one's voice would carry. Amateurs also had received help from friends in Congress. William Stedman Green, the 78-year-old chairman of the House Committee on the Merchant Marine and Fisheries, representative from Massachusetts, and loyal protector of amateur rights, was credited with a successful reopening. Green had been the one who introduced the resolution on the League's behalf, asking the Navy to supply a reason for the continuing ban. Receiving no reply, he had then introduced Joint Resolution 217, directing the Secretary of the Navy to remove the restrictions. The League headquarters staff had to scramble to add the ban off insert to the previous issue when the news arrived just at press time. It would now take some hard work to get everything and everyone up and running again. The days of real sport are at last with us, noted ARRL Secretary Kenneth Warner, directing readers to "Come on, fellas, and get into the air again." An incredible array of new gear developed and manufactured during the war was becoming available, and that meant increased advertising revenue for QST, its lifeblood. The editor predicted a day when QST could be 132 pages long, twice the size of this issue. It would actually take until September of the following year for the magazine to again reach 100 pages, a size previously seen in April 1917, nearly 3.5 years earlier. Getting back on the air meant everyone had to be relicensed. Though some still had unexpired commercial licenses, which the government would count as operator licenses, all amateur operator and station licenses had expired. As before the war, a second-class license would be granted without examination to applicants located more than 50 miles from a district office. One could take a test given by the district inspector by appointment and receive a first-class amateur license on successfully passing it. The new test format was a bit different, requiring longer answers from the applicant to demonstrate depth of understanding. The government published a document called Radio Communication Laws of the United States, containing the regulations one must know for the test. On receiving an operator license, you could next apply for a station license using a form to describe various aspects of your station. That information and how well you had complied with the law in building it determined whether or not the license would be granted. Radio inspectors were authorized to disclose the call sign that an applicant would be issued once a station license was granted. The licensee would then be permitted to begin operation without waiting for the actual license to arrive in the mail. Hams were encouraged to send their new call signs to ARRL as they were issued so that they could be published and help everyone to once again recognize one another on the air. The first directory of calls appeared in December, listing only new 1st District stations, apparently the only district reporting new licenses to that point. The list included the Harvard Wireless Club, 1AF, MIT, 1AN, Maxim, 1AW, and Tusca, 1AY. Some stations in other districts had been given permission to use their old calls, possibly because they held unexpired commercial licenses. Some of these stations were prominent pre-war relayers, organizations, and operating department officers, including Mrs. Candler, 8NH, FN Schnell, 9AH, RH.G. Matthews, 9ZN, J.O. Smith, 2ZL, and Charles Service, 3QZ. On the air, things were still very quiet, even though the winter, the prime radio season, approached. The Atlantic Division manager reported hearing mostly silence on the first night of reopening and only a few locals. Activity returned gradually as everyone worked to connect equipment and erect antennas. Licensed or not, amateurs had refrained from reassembling their stations before the reopening, perhaps due to uncertainty about when it would occur, given the long delay, or perhaps because they stuck to the letter of the law that prohibited even assembling a station during the shutdown. In memoriam for December listed 11 more amateurs, some killed while serving in the military. WCC on Cape Cod had a long history in a medium with a short one. Wired telegraph services such as the transatlantic cable were Marconi's natural initial competition. In 1914, he established a station at Chatham, Massachusetts, to replace its earlier one in Wellfleet. That one had made history in 1903 by relaying a message from President Theodore Roosevelt to the King of England directly via wireless using its 35 kW spark transmitter feeding a 200-foot wire conical antenna supported by 4 210-foot towers. WCC, originally simply CC for Cape Cod, became one of the most prominent wireless stations in the United States, and Irving Vermiglia had been a station manager there since early 1916. Answering the Navy's call for radio operators, he enlisted in 1917, served during the war, and then returned home to Massachusetts and WCC. He was back on the air and in print again in December 1919, publishing another QST humor article, SOL, meaning sorta out of luck, though it not labeled as such in the article, telling of his early days in the Navy. Although it was billed as the first of a two-part article, the second part never appeared. By this time, he had become well enough known among hams to be often identified by his last name alone. Everyone else in QST was referred to as Mr. So-and-so or by their complete name, but amateur number one was just Vermiglia. Everyone finally got a look at him in the February 1920 issue's installment of Who's Who in Wireless, identified as a shift engineer at the Marconi station. The article paraphrased him as admitting that he'd rather fuss with wireless than eat, and his record showed it. In October, pictures of his station appeared too. He was now 1HAA, a good call for a funny man in Marion, Massachusetts. His antenna was a fan array of vertical wires, narrow-spaced at the base and wide at the top, connected to a horizontal wire suspended between wooden supports, very similar to Maxim's antenna and considered a leading-edge design. Two interior pictures depict a neatly arranged high-power Spark station. Another change in call sign came in July 1921 when he received a special station license and QST announced that 1HAA is no more. Vermilion was now 1ZE using 200, 250, and 375 meters. He continued to work for United Wireless after its acquisition by Marconi, working as manager of WCC until he left the Radio Corporation in 1922 to become manager of the radio department at Slocum and Kilburn, a parts and equipment company. Vermilion would continue to play a role in two camps as professional and amateur. Included in this material are quotes from the following: Hiram Percy Maxim, The Importance of Our ARRL, QST, November 1919, page 3. The Champion of the Amateurs, QST, November 1919, page 5. At Last, editorial, QST, November 1919, page 13. Getting Your Licenses, QST, November 1919, page 12. In Search of Guillermo, ARRL Web, 17 March 2005. Who's Who in Amateur Wireless, QST, February 1920, page 25. Amateur Radio Stations, QST, October 1920, page 35. With appreciation to Chris Cadella, W2PA, for the use of his website materials, Ham Radio History, A Century of Amateur Radio, Ham's Organizations, Events, Inventions, I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR, reporting for This Week in Amateur Radio.
Coming up on our 26th year keeping the amateur radio community around the world informed, you are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio. Available worldwide as a podcast from our web at twiar.net.
Foundations of Amateur Radio. As you might know, a little while ago I started a new project. The Bold Yak project aims to create a modular, bidirectional and distributed signal processing and control system that leverages GNU radio. In embarking on this adventure, I've been absorbing information as I go, whilst explaining what I've learned to anyone who will sit still long enough. Credit to Glyn, Victor Kilo 6 Papa Alpha Whiskey and Charles November Kilo 8 Oscar for their patience. For most people, me included, the introduction to GNU radio happens via a graphical user interface, where you build so-called flow graphs. These are made up of little blocks that you wire together to get from a source, where a signal originates, to a sink where it terminates. Each of these blocks does something to the signal. It might be a filter, an amplifier, it might encode or decode a signal like FM, AM, wideband FM, or some other modulation like phase modulation or OFDM, orthogonal frequency division multiplexing, a way of transmitting digital information using multiple channels. It's used in places like Wi-Fi, ADSL and DSL, digital television, as well as modern cellular systems. Those blocks generally expect a specific type of input and generate some particular output. After you save your design, you can run the flow graph, and behind the scenes some magic happens. Your visual representation of a signal flow is translated into either Python or C++, and the resulting application is what is actually run, which is why the user interface that you design your flow graph in is cunningly named GNU Radio Companion. So what if you want to do something that doesn't yet exist? As it happens, that's where I came across a YouTube video by John, Victor Echo 6 Echo Yankee, called GNU Radio Embedded Python Block, which neatly describes a fundamental aspect of how the GNU Radio framework actually operates. One of the blocks available to you is one called Python Block, which you can add to your flow graph just like any other block. What sets it apart from the others is that you can open it up and write some Python code to process the signal. When you first insert such a block, it's already populated with some skeleton code, so it already does something from the get-go, and that's helpful because if you break the code, you get to keep both parts. Seriously, it allows you to figure out what you broke rather than having to worry immediately about how specifically the code is wired to the outside world, which, let's face it, is not trivial. If you're a programmer, think of it as the hello world of GNU Radio. If not much of that means anything, think of it as a variable electronic component. If you need it to be a capacitor, it can be that, or a transistor, a whole circuit, or just a filter, all in software right there at your fingertips and no soldering required. Now, I'm under no illusion that everybody is going to want to get down and dirty with Python at this point, and truth be told, I have a, let's call it, special relationship with the language. But that is something I'm just going to have to get over if this project is going to go anywhere. For my sins this week, I attempted to recreate the intent of John's video on my own keyboard, and discovered that debugging code in this environment might be tricky. It turns out that you can actually print out Python variables within your code, and in the GNU Radio environment, they'll show up in the console inside the companion window, which is handy if you committed one of many Python sins, like, say, attempting to compare an integer against a list. Don't ask me how I know. One thing I'm planning to attempt is to get the same thing going for C++ output. By default, GNU Radio Companion uses Python, but you can change it so instead of generating Python, it can generate C++. Whilst I have no immediate need for that, I do know that at some point it's likely that I will. Like, say, when I want to run something on an embedded processor or some other contraption. So, whilst I have nothing to lose, I want to try out the boundaries of my new toy. Besides, I have form. In testing boundaries, that is. I'm Ono, Victor Kilo 6, Foxtrot Lima, Alpha Bravo.
An appeals court has overturned the Federal Communications Commission's latest net neutrality rules, paving the way for Internet providers to arbitrarily throttle web access for certain customers and services. The ruling is the latest twist in a decade-long battle in Washington over the FCC's ability to regulate telecommunication companies. In 2015, the FCC, under former President Barack Obama, adopted rules that categorized broadband Internet providers as telecommunications services and prohibited them from arbitrarily blocking and throttling Internet users or giving priority to websites that paid for preferential treatment. Under Donald Trump's first administration in 2018, the FCC rescinded those net neutrality rules. Then, in 2024, under Joe Biden, the FCC voted to restore them. A coalition of telecom industry groups sued to block the rules again, leading to the latest ruling by the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals. The three-judge panel wrote that for the first 15 years after Congress passed the Telecommunications Act of 1996, the FCC oversaw the Internet with a light touch and classified Internet service providers as information services, which limited the extent to which the agency could regulate them. That changed in 2015 when the agency interpreted Internet service providers to be telecommunications services, a different category under the 1996 law that allowed for stricter regulations.
Since 2014, the Holmesburg Amateur Radio Club has participated in the Stamps for the Wounded program. Stamps for the Wounded is a service organization dedicated to providing comfort and stimulating activity to United States veterans through stamp collecting. Stamps for Wounded send stamps, covers, supplies, and literature to enable veterans to begin or continue collecting stamps. Stamp collecting is an activity that provides comfort, meaningful activity, and social connections. It is not physically challenging and very stimulating. Stamps for the Wounded has been helping veterans since 1942 and welcomes any United States veteran who would like to begin or continue collecting stamps to join our program to receive stamps and philatelic materials. The club originally got involved with the Stamps for the Wounded program when they received about 1,000 QSL card requests following members' participation in the annual 13 Colonies special event held each July. Hart's Club Call, Whiskey Mike 3, Papa Echo November, is a bonus station during that event. The question came up as to what, if anything, could be done with all the canceled stamps on the envelopes. Upon learning of the program, club members began inserting a brief note about the program with the QSL card request. Soon, envelopes both large and small started to arrive from around the United States. We even got packages from England and Germany. Stamps came from individuals, sport clubs, businesses, and more. Many asked how their school or business could get involved. Bob Joshuette, Whiskey Alpha 3 Papa Zulu Oscar, trustee of the Whiskey Mike 3 Papa Echo November call sign, says this has provided a way to introduce people to ham radio. Rich Shivers, Kilo 3 Uniform Juliet, who coordinates the shipping of the stamps to Stamps for the Wounded, says the club has shipped about 74 pounds of stamps so far. That's a lot of stamps when you consider stamps are shipped with about a 1/4-inch border. Rob Jensen, president of Stamps for the Wounded, recently thanked Hart for coordinating outreach among your members and other amateur radio operators around the world. We have received donations from others who have seen info with your QSL cards and on your website. Following a recent Hart shipment to Stamps for the Wounded, Jensen said, "We gratefully acknowledge your receipt of your box of United States and foreign use stamps and some United States Mint postage stamps. On behalf of our veterans and our volunteer staff, we thank you all for promoting us and encouraging your members and other radio operators to send us stamps from QSL cards, which we forward to our veterans." He continued, "We have plenty of material to share, so if any of your members or radio contacts are veterans or active duty military who collect stamps or covers, or who are interested in adding stamp collecting to their hobbies, please point them to our website, stampsforthewounded, all one word, .org, and we will get them set up." Some of the items the Stamps for the Wounded program can use include undamaged used stamps from the United States of America or a foreign country, except for common stamps that have nonprofit or bulk rate printed on them, or stamps with the United States flag as their entire design. Other types of stamps and envelopes that are accessible can be found at stampsforthewounded.org website. For further information, contact Bob Josuwat, Whiskey Alpha 3 Papa Zulu Oscar at Whiskey Mike 3 Papa Echo November at AOL.com.
Coming up on our 26th year keeping the amateur radio community around the world informed, you are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio. Available worldwide as a podcast from our web at twiar.net.
It is time for the first Volunteer Monitor Program report of 2025. The Volunteer Monitor Program is a joint initiative between ARRL and the FCC to enhance compliance in the amateur radio service. Here is this month's activity report of the VM program. An amateur radio operator in Wyoming received a commendation for relinquishing 3.927 MHz during a regularly scheduled net operation to allow emergency traffic related to the Asheville, North Carolina, floods and relief efforts on September 24, 2024. An amateur radio operator in Florida received a commendation for work on the Florida SAR net on the 444.325 MHz repeater, in cooperation with Florida's State Emergency Agency, during a hurricane and ensuing storm. An amateur radio operator in Illinois received a commendation for working with a local emergency management agency on the W9ANL 146.900 MHz repeater in an effort to clear down trees and power lines after storms. Technician class operators in Idaho and Washington received advisory notices about FT8 operation on 40 meters. Technicians have only CW privileges on 40 meters. Meanwhile, 2 technician class operators in California, and 1 in Oregon, received advisory notices concerning operation of FT8 on 20 meters. Technicians have no operating privileges on 20 meters. An operator in South Carolina received an advisory notice concerning interference on 3.933 MHz after refusing to leave a net operating on that frequency. An operator in New York received an advisory notice concerning interference on 7.200 MHz with digital signals such as EasyPAL, Freenet, and SSTV, as well as general noises. An operator in Alabama received an advisory notice concerning operation on SAR net utilizing harassment and a false call sign. Each licensee was cautioned that such operation would be an issue during any license renewal proceedings. There were 2 volunteer monitor alerts issued in October 2024 to monitors east of the Mississippi, to monitor for interference to hurricane and tropical storm emergency nets during the month. No instances of interference were detected. The totals for this report's monitoring were 1,443 hours on HF frequencies, and 1,761 hours on VHF frequencies and above, for a total of 3,204 hours. We thank Volunteer Monitor Program Administrator Riley Hollingsworth, K4ZDH, for this report.
Bruce Page, KK5DO, is here now with this week's AMSAT report. Bruce?
Thanks, John. Hope everyone got all the satellite, HF, and antenna gear they wanted from Santa. If not, maybe this year. If you were lucky enough to get some new satellite gear, you can test it out at home, and then head out on the road and do some roving. Give out a few grid squares to others and start building or adding to your reverse VUCC or Gridmaster progress. There are many awards available for satellite operators. Take a look at them over at AMSAT.org under the Services tab. Like the ARRL awards, there's an award that will meet everyone's capabilities. In fact, the very first award is going to be your hardest one to earn. It is for making your first satellite contact. Although only one contact is required, you first have to learn to use your radio and tune it for the up and down frequencies. Then you have to learn how to point your antenna. It sounds so easy. If you remember your first HF QSO or your first CW QSO, you will remember the sweat on your palms, the choking of your call sign that first time. You make that first contact and you're in the clouds. It's a great feeling. Don't forget to write down the station you work, the satellite, time and date. Now send it in to the ARRL LOTW for credit and maybe even request a paper QSL from the other station. Enjoy the satellites and have fun with another facet of ham radio. There's something in ham radio for everyone. This is Bruce Page, KK5DO. Back to you, John.
And thanks, Bruce, for that report.
It is time for this week's Propagation in Space Weather Forecast Report. Brought to us each week by our solar prognosticator, Tad Cook, K7RA in Seattle, Washington. Currently, a geomagnetic storm is raging. On January 1st and 2nd, Alaska's College A index reached 113. The predicted planetary A index is 8, then 5 over the next few days, then up to 50 on January 27th. Aurora is visible in Arizona in North America and as far south as Italy in Europe. Predicted solar flux is 215 and 210 on January 5th and 6th. 205 on January 7th and 8th. 200, 170 and 165 on January 9th through the 11th. And 170 on January 12th and 13th. Be sure and see the current issue of QST magazine about the peak of cycle 25.
In Radio Sport this week, a lot of great contests. Continuing on January 3rd, the Walk for the Bacon QRP contest. That's CW. January 3rd, it's the NCCC FT4 Sprint. That's digital. Also on January 3rd, the NCCC Sprint, CW. January 4th, Bedexis 070 Club PSK Fest is digital. January 4th, the Marconi Club Arellano QSO Party Day. That's CW. January 4th through the 5th, the WWPMC contest, CW and phone. Also on January 4th, the RSGB AFS contest. That's CW. January 4th, it's the ARRL Kids Day. That's phone. And on January 4th through the 5th, the ARRL Ready Roundup. That is digital. And don't forget to visit the ARRL contest calendar for more events and information. Upcoming state section and division conventions. January 4th, the Ham Radio University, that's hosting the ARRL New York City Long Island Section Convention in Brookville, New York. January 10th through the 11th, it's the 2025 Southwest Florida Regional Ham Fest, hosting the ARRL Southern Florida Section Convention in Fort Myers, Florida. January 17th and 18th, the Cowtown Ham Fest, hosting the ARRL North Texas Section Convention in Forest Hills, Texas. And on January 31st to February 1st, the Jackson MS Capital City Ham Fest 2025, hosting the ARRL Mississippi Section Convention. That's in Jackson, Mississippi. And remember to search the ARRL Ham Fest and Convention database to find more events in your area.
It has happened before, and here we are again. A bill to mandate broadcast radio in U.S. vehicles has died without lawmakers taking action. Here are the details. Despite bipartisan support for it in the U.S. Congress, the AM Radio for Every Vehicle Act fell victim on December 17th to scrambling by lawmakers in Washington, D.C. Those members of Congress faced a deadline to pass a measure that would keep the government funded through March 14th and avoid a widespread shutdown. CBS News reported that the lawmakers' stopgap spending measure reached mid-month would solve the greater issue, but in doing so would cut several items, including the AM radio mandate for vehicles. The National Association of Broadcasters was among those expressing disappointment, since AM radio is considered a valuable resource for transmitting public safety information during emergencies. The makers of some electric cars would like AM radio eliminated, acknowledging that their vehicles' electronic systems interfere with AM reception. The bill is not dead, however. Many advocates plan to take the measure up in the next session of Congress in 2025.
Ham Radio Science Citizen Investigation, HAMSCI, will hold its 2025 Community Workshop on March 14th and 15th, 2025, at the New Jersey Institute of Technology in Newark, New Jersey. The theme for this year's conference is HAMSCI's Big Year and will provide an opportunity for both amateur radio and professional research communities to collaborate and share ideas. The session, planned for Friday, will be organized in the format of a traditional science workshop with a full day's program of oral, technical, and scientific presentations. The Saturday session will focus more on the citizen science or volunteer aspect of HAMSCI, where amateur radio operators make the greatest impact. HAMSCI and the New Jersey Institute of Technology will be hosting a banquet on Friday night with a keynote speaker. Conference and registration details will be available soon. For more information about HAMSCI and to join the mailing list and receive their quarterly newsletter, please visit the HAMSCI website.
The Handy Ham program ended in 2024 by reporting on gains and successes in its services and initiatives to disabled amateur radio operators. The Handycam program, which has served the disabled ham community since 1967, ended in 2024 with a progress report on its supporters and on its website, outlining gains in its journey. The year included a number of new classes held virtually, including one in basic Morse code and another for technician class candidates. Handycam said its radio club also achieved gains, reaching a milestone membership level of 158. The Handycam program itself welcomed 65 new participants. The program coordinator, Lucinda Moody, AB8WF, summed up this year by calling it a year of achievement and expansion. For more details about the program, visit handyham.org.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available to download as a podcast from anywhere on the web podcasts are available.
Quartzfest, a week-long ham radio, camping, learning, and living outdoor event, will be held January 19th through the 25th, 2025, near Quartzsite, Arizona. Quartzfest is an ARRL specialty convention. Special Events Station W7Q will be in operation 0900 through 1800 PST daily. ARRL National Instructor Gordon West, WB6NOA, will hold a welcome seminar Monday, January 20th at 0900 through 1000 PST, and on Friday afternoon at 1400 PST, West will be the featured speaker at the ARRL Instructor Seminar. Camping is free, but there is a $5 admission charge. Events scheduled throughout the week include an RV and rock show on Tuesday, an off-road adventure Wednesday morning, and a hike to Cunningham Peak Thursday. Quartzfest is located 7 miles south of Quartzsite on US 95 at La Paz Valley Road.
The Jackson Butts County Public Library in Georgia is QRV, a collection of 11 amateur radio books donated a month ago by the Amateur Radio Club of Butts County has been entered into the library's system and was placed on the shelves recently for circulation. This is the latest partnership in the U.S. of amateur radio clubs and their local libraries. Library manager Kathy Kelly said that the donation was made through the efforts of Buzz Kutcher, K3GWK, and Nancy Phillips, K4NEP, from the club. The volumes include technical books, licensing guides, and regulations from the Federal Communications Commission. Kathy went on to say that we're hoping they will be useful to many. They're ready to go.
Organizers of the International DX Convention are calling the opening day program on Friday, April 11th, a first-of-its-kind event. It's a full day of discussions devoting to solving problems that have emerged as some top DX entities grow more expensive, more restrictive, and more risky. Although new approaches, such as remotely controlled stations, have been employed for successful activations, DXers are seeking even more creative solutions. The one-day program will take place on the first day of the three-day convention at the Visalia Conference Center in Visalia, California, and will bring demonstrations and guest speakers into the spotlight. The topics will be of particular interest to DXers, DXpeditioners, and contest station designers, and any other ham hoping to sharpen their DXCC scores. Registration for the conference has already opened, and the conference itself concludes on April 13th, 2025.
The Mile High Radio Club in California isn't just in favor of growing amateur radio as a public service, it wants to see radio in general become a public service asset. With this in mind, the club recently agreed to provide its mountain community with a repeater for General Mobile Radio Service, or GMRS, so anyone with a compatible radio can pass along information or ask for help. The repeater is to be located in Idlewild, in a region often facing wildfires and earthquakes. Expanded GMR service would prove useful not only during events such as those, but to assist hikers who encounter emergency situations on the popular wilderness trails. Like amateur radio operators, GMRS users must be licensed, but there is no qualifying test, and one license can be used by all members of a family.
Listeners of the Deutsche Amateur Radio Club's weekly shortwave broadcast will be tuning their dials to 9,670 kilohertz on Sunday, January 5th, as programming begins from a new location at a BBC property in Wolverton, England. The New Year's move comes with the December shutdown of Austria's ORS shortwave radio station in Moosbrunn, the former home of Radio Austria International. The new location is operated by a BBC subsidiary company, Encompass Media, and is home to 10 transmitters. The Austrian station had carried programming for the Deutsche Amateur Radio Club for about a decade.
Amateur radio station DL0DM recently finished celebrating 2 anniversaries in December, the club's 75th year as a radio licensee and its 35th year of operating from its home at the Deutsche Museum in Munich. Now the ham radio station is getting ready for another celebration, the centennial of the museum, one of the world's major showcases of science and technology. The Amateur Radio Club at Munich's Deutsche Museum is putting the call sign DL100DM on the air throughout 2025. The museum is marking its 100th anniversary, a time particularly for amateurs to remember its long-standing connection to radio. Even before the Ham Radio Club had established a permanent presence there, the museum was proudly featuring a 100-watt shortwave transmitter that had been built by a student in 1938, which CW operators would occasionally put on the air. The transmitter is still at the museum, and it is on view in the electronics exhibition area. The club station, however, isn't simply a part of the museum's exhibits and its daily demonstrations. It is a major part of the centennial celebration. Listen throughout 2025 for DL100DM on the bands.
Owen Garriott, W5LFL, has sparked kids' imaginations around the globe, including one Mackenzie Denton, KO4GLN, a name we should remember in both ham radio and leadership. A pre-med junior at Old Dominion University in Norfolk, Virginia, Mackenzie has already achieved what most of us only aspire to in a lifetime. Licensed during the pandemic, she has risen quickly to earn her extra class license, rejuvenate her university's amateur radio club, and take on roles like Virginia Section Youth Coordinator for the ARRL while excelling as a student and aspiring physician. Her unique journey into ham radio was sparked by a fascination with astronaut Owen Garriott's historic space contacts. She says the hobby became a cornerstone of her development, offering her friendships, mentorship, and even opportunities to shadow in an emergency room critical for her career path in medicine. Mackenzie's leadership also extends beyond ham radio. She draws connections between the hobby and broader fields, from emergency preparedness to STEM education, while advocating for integrating amateur radio into schools and modern technology. She says in a call to action, let's align the hobby with emerging frontiers like quantum computing and space exploration, ensuring ham radio remains relevant and transformative for generations to come.
In 2005, Joseph Henry Stormer, W3TL, returned to amateur radio, the hobby that he'd loved as a teenager. He quickly deepened his involvement in both radio and community, and Joe joined the Sussex Amateur Radio Association in 2006 and became its president a year later. He also belonged to the Amateur Radio Lighthouse Society, the OM International Sideband Society, and served as Assistant Emergency Coordinator for the Amateur Radio Emergency Service of the ARRL. He was a team leader for the BBB Hospital's Amateur Radio Operators Room. As a volunteer examiner, Joe also was a team leader of the Delaware Amateur Radio Testing Team and a certified volunteer examiner with the Laurel Amateur Radio Club. He let hams and prospective hams throughout Delaware know they were always welcome to contact him to arrange for a licensing exam. According to his online obituary, he became ill last year, and Joe died on December 22nd. He was 80 years old.
Train enthusiasts credit the modern railways with helping Britain's identity take shape over the decades. The British Railways Amateur Radio Society, G4LMR, has amplified that message on the air since it was formed in 1966 by a handful of railwaymen who were also amateur radio operators. Now its membership includes any amateurs with an interest in the railways. A busy and active society with a full event calendar, the group is hosting a year-long special event station, GB0LMR, to promote the message of celebration and mark 200 years of modern railway service. The station is on the air from January through to the end of 2025. If you have an interest in trains or just in history, this is just the ticket.
You're listening to North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine of the air. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, distributed worldwide at twiar.net.
This Week in Amateur Radio is holding open auditions for news anchors for the weekly national worldwide amateur radio news service. If you have a good radio voice and can reliably read provided news copy, we are looking for you. This, of course, is an all-volunteer position. An amateur radio license is not required. You must have a high-quality microphone, headset mics are not used, and be familiar with audio editing software to record and edit your finished news stories before uploading. If you would like to try out for a weekly or bi-weekly anchor position with North America's premier amateur radio news on air and podcast, please send an email to our producer, George, W2XBS. You can include a sample MP3 of yourself reading news copies sent as an attachment to W2XBS77@gmail.com. That's whiskey, the number 2, X-ray Bravo Sierra 77@gmail.com. Be sure and use Anchor Audition in the subject line. Please include your phone number and a good window of time for a callback to discuss your submission and our operating logistics to see if This Week in Amateur Radio is a good fit for you. We hope to hear from you soon.
And finally this week, we leave you with this story from space. As we were all relaxing on Christmas Eve, December 24th, NASA's Parker Solar Probe set a record by flying 3.86 million miles, or 6.1 million kilometers, from the sun. That approach made the small probe the first and fastest object created by humans to come that close to the sun, according to a report in Forbes magazine. Its speed was clocked at 430,000 miles per hour, the equivalent of 692,000 kilometers per hour. Nicola Fox, NASA's Associate Administrator for Science Missions, said in a Christmas Eve video that the probe had achieved the very mission it was intended for with its unprecedented flight so close to the sun. This solar pass came as the probe made its 22nd approach since its launch more than 6 years ago. The probe is well shielded for this latest plunge into the sun. More than 4 years ago, it entered one of the most powerful coronal mass ejections ever recorded, according to NASA.
This Week in Amateur Radio is heard around the world on nets and great repeater systems like our newest affiliates, the K2IWR repeater on 147.180 MHz in Cortland, New York, and the K2MST repeater on 443.150 MHz serving all of Syracuse, New York. We welcome them aboard the vast This Week in Amateur Radio network of repeaters and nets around the world. If your net or repeater carries This Week in Amateur Radio, why not let us know about it, and we'll give you a free promo here on the air. All you need to do is put all the details into an email and give us the repeater call sign, frequency, area served, and the days and times that you carry This Week in Amateur Radio, and send it off in an email to w2xbs77@gmail.com. We'd be happy to hear from you. That address, once again, is w2xbs77@gmail.com. We hope to hear from you real soon. Many of the news and information items heard in this edition of This Week in Amateur Radio have been provided by the American Radio Relay League, the ARRL Audio News Service, and the ARRL Letter, AMSAT, the Radio Amateurs of Canada, the Shortwave Listening Post, the Federal Communications Commission, the Radio Society of Great Britain, and Ofcom, the South African Radio League, the International Amateur Radio Union, the Wireless Institute of Australia and the Australian Communications and Media Authority, the New Zealand Association of Radio Transmitters, the Amateur Radio Newsline, the Rain Hamcast, Eric Guth, 4Z1UG and QSO Today, QRZ.com, the International Telecommunications Union, the 425DX News, Parks on the Air, and the Soda Reflector, and various news sources on the Internet.
With special thanks to all our weekly news sources and to you, our listeners, that wraps up this edition of This Week in Amateur Radio. If you would like to write to us, you can find everything you need, including archive editions of the news service, at our website at twiar.net. And now, for all of us at This Week in Amateur Radio headquarters and all our news team around the world, this is Will Rogers, K5WLR in Fayetteville, Arkansas, wishing you 73.